Hello, everybody, and welcome back to AI Blades, bringing you cutting edge AI security every single week. My name's David Willis Owen, and on today's episodes, we have a very exciting guest, none other than Chester Wisniewski. Chester is the Global Field CTO at Sophos and has over 25 years of cybersecurity experience. Now, bear in mind that all opinions expressed in this podcast are our own opinions. They do not reflect the opinions of our companies. And also, Chester has a new podcast coming out, which is called Security Takes Two. So make sure to look in the show description and listen to that. Now, without further ado, let's get on to the interview. Awesome. How are you doing?
I'm all right. Sorry for the confusion there. I guess you got the broken meeting ID and I had the cabling and screwing around. So
Yeah, two security professionals, two IT professionals, we get it sorted. But
eventually.
so do you actually run your own podcast?
So I just started one again. So I had done a podcast at work at Sophos starting in 2008 for about 10 years called the Sophos Security Chat, which was intended to be a weekly 15-minute roundup of like what was back to ground truth. It was like, okay, there was all kinds of hype in the news about whatever giant hack it was or whatever had happened. What what truth is in there and what takeaways from that are actually useful. So the idea was to make it a digest, if you will, because at the time most of the podcasts in security space were a good hour plus. And it was like, well, I don't have time to listen. Like, I love the conversations people have over the course of an hour. I really enjoy podcasts, but my podcast was like, what about the busy IT people who don't have time to be full-time security folks? What do they need to know about the truth that happened this week? Because they're not going to have the opportunity to go read the 50 articles that I read and then like have the experience and background I have to sort out the truth from all the fluff and make that into a podcast. So we did about 300 episodes of that over 10 years. So obviously I didn't hit weekly because there would have been a lot more than 300. But because I was, a very busy professional, I just had to squeeze them in where I could. And then I got too busy to do them just before the pandemic. So I think I stopped doing them in 2018 or 2019. And I've just had the itch because I really missed doing it. I really enjoy it. And the crazy thing is, well, being able to promote some of it through the Sophos blogs and things. I had, pretty good following. I think we were getting around 10,000 listens a week.
Wow.
On the podcast, which was great. But what was fun about it is, when I travel around the world talking at conferences and all this kind of stuff, for years, people would come up to me, oh, I listen to your podcast, and you get to meet the people and engage with them. It was really a lot of fun. So, a couple months ago, a colleague of mine in Australia and I just started a new one called Security Take Two. And the idea is to go after enough time has passed that we've learned the truth, go back and look at these events. So like what's going on with CrowdStrike this week? It's fascinating watching it unravel in real time, but a year from now, we're going to think about it very differently. From now, we're going to know a lot more about the actual root cause of what happened. We're going to know a lot more about the damages. We're going to know a lot more about how that changed the regulatory landscape and a lot of other things around risk management. And that'll be a much more interesting story, to be honest, a year from now than it is right now. And so the idea of this podcast to do that kind of sort of thing, look at stuff that's happened 2-3 years ago. The other interesting thing is if you go into, if you're interested in learning what happens in these incidents, the court documents, there's always a lawsuit, right? Whenever there's a big breach, somebody's going to sue. And when those court cases are over, all of that is now public record, and you can see what actually happened because the lawyers for the victims are always going to force them to disclose their investigations, their forensic reports, all this kind of stuff. What was the root cause? Was there negligence that caused my data to be breached? All this kind of stuff, right? And again, that takes often 2, 3, 4 years to go through the court system, depending which countries. Particularly in the U.S., usually it's a solid 2 or 3 years before those cases are resolved and that stuff becomes public record. But afterwards, you've got like a complete detailed map of pretty much everything that happened in the incident. And there's a lot to be learned from those because obviously we don't like to admit when we're breached. So people have a tendency to not say very much publicly about what actually happened, which means we all get to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. So the goal of that podcast is kind of try to do that kind of thing. Go back on an expedition and go, what really happened at Sony? What really happened at Target? What really happened at Santander Bank when they had their breach, and then what can we take away from that to better fix our policies and procedures and how we go about protecting our data.
100%. I mean, that's so valuable because in a space where people are constantly pushing the new technologies, we keep seeing the same things happening over and over and over again. Um, so so yeah, I'd like to kind of bring the conversation around to generative AI. So kind of looking back at when ChatGPT was released to the world, I've actually had this question myself before. Do you think it was released too soon, given the number of security concerns and unanswered questions which are arguably present?
I think it was too soon for certain things. Certainly, with regards to privacy, there's already been quite a few different issues where privacy things have come up that they weren't kind of fully baked, and things leak from one thing to another where they ought not to, and that sort of thing. There's so many different ways that security and generative AI link, that there's some of them that it kind of has been fine, and other areas where it's a little more sensitive. And I think, privacy is one of the ones where it felt a little early. The other issue, I guess, is unleashing uh, natural English language skills at the level that it has for people that don't have that skill. I don't know that the abuse was taken into consideration. Like, in certain ways, it's amazing to be able to interact with someone who's not a native English speaker and effectively work as a translator. It does an amazing job of writing text in multiple languages, which is great
Mm.
for people using it and not abusing it. But of course, the abuse angle of it didn't seem to occur to them. And this idea that they can put some bounds around it to prevent it from saying certain things, and then having to imagine all the different terrible things people are going to try to use it to say, is just going to be a losing battle. And so the move fast and break things, as usual, breaks more things than it accomplishes. But the moving fast makes the people who make it rich, and the breaking things falls on the rest of us, and we have to deal with the brokenness that comes out of it, as usual. Um, but I guess we're, I would say a year and a half in from its big debut. I mean, GPT's been around for ChatGPT even's been around for a lot longer than most people realize.
Mm.
But most people, I guess, became aware of it in December of 2022 or November of 2022 when it started getting a lot of press. Um, and to be fair, the abuse of it has been nominal, right? It hasn't had big impacts yet. So the good news is it could have been worse.
100%, 100%. And you touched on a really good point there where you said that ChatGPT has actually been out for a lot longer than people realize. So we're kind of at this part where there's like this hype spike. So off the back of that, do you think that AI security is the next big skill set, similar to how we see um, cloud security becoming quite mainstream, or do you think that it's more of a flash in the pan thing?
Look, the LLM situation, the hype around LLM is that it's going to change everything in the world. And the truth is there's a dozen things that's going to make a really meaningful difference and it's incredibly useful for. And for the rest of the things, it's not going to do much at all. So there's absolutely going to be a demand and a need for people who understand how it works and know how to both manipulate it and contain it for the things that it's useful for. But it's not going to be all the things that, if you listen to the hype cycle, it's like, this is going to change every part of our lives. And I don't really personally subscribe to that. And this bears out in just our own experiments with using it and trying to make use of it. There are some incredibly useful things. And, one of the things that I just started talking about was its mastery of language. Well, it's also got mastery of language of programming languages and syntaxes of computer things that are really hard for humans. And so those types of applications are going to continue to be useful. And there's going to be a lot of demand for security professionals to play a role in that, right? Because I love the idea that I'm terrible at writing SQL queries, but it probably can write me a SQL query because it doesn't know that SQL isn't French. To it, it's just another language. So that's pretty awesome because even if it gets it wrong, just like if it gets the French a little bit wrong, I can probably fix it. But as a human being, it would take me a lot longer to figure out how to do it. Now, somebody's going to have to figure out how to not leak what I was trying to search for with my query, make sure that somebody else can't extract that from this engine and allow me to use it safely. And I think that obviously is where the security professionals are going to have a role, but I'm not sure it's going to be like the dominant security job 10 years from now, that everybody's only going to be working on AI security. There's going to be narrow applications where it's incredibly important. And, I think we'll probably talk about it in this conversation, things like Apple Intelligence and things like this. There's clearly going to be places where privacy and security professionals have an incredibly important role to play.
Yeah, so it'd be interesting to discuss Apple Intelligence, because one of the biggest security issues with LLMs is that they process some user data unencrypted on the server to be able to actually formulate a response, an LLM response to a query. So Apple have made a lot of claims with their private cloud compute model about claims such as having a locked down supply chain, having no user logs stored or accessed by site reliability engineers. So I'd be interested to hear your take on Apple Intelligence compared to what we have on the market so far.
Well, being that it hasn't shipped, it all sounds good.
Yeah,
The question is, from when it was announced, it sounds like it'll be almost a year before we actually see certainly the cloud version of Apple Intelligence. I'm not sure if, I guess to be clear for listeners, there's sort of two components to Apple's system. There's the on-device thing that will be in your iPhone itself on the iPhone 15s and higher, where some compute can be done on the phone itself and not be sent off to the cloud. So obviously that helps from a privacy perspective of third parties not having access to that data. And then there's the cloud aspect for the more complex tasks that can't be done on your phone that are going to get offloaded into Apple's cloud. And then in the blueprint for it all sounds great, but there's a whole ton of questions that remain to be answered as to how it's actually going to work when it's deployed. And they said they're going to run it all on, quote, Apple Silicon, and that's unclear to me whether that means the infrastructure is running on Apple's hardware and they're still using, say, NVIDIA H100 GPUs like everyone else is using because of their amazing floating point compute power, which is what we use to calculate all the mathematics that we need to do for artificial intelligence LLMs. And if not, if it's actually Apple Silicon, like they're just using beefed up M3 chips that they've maxed out to be LLM supercomputer capable chips themselves, then the question is, well, how much time do they have to test and harden all of that to determine that all the memory is being handled safely? And it just seems like there's a lot there. And the cost is the other issue that is unclear to me, because they basically are promising to almost like spin up a VM, run your query, give you a response back to your device, and then destroy that VM entirely, not record any of the inputs or outputs, and they're kind of promising to have that fully audited and allow external entities to see how it's working. It sounds brilliant, but it also sounds incredibly expensive when you consider how expensive it is to operate something like ChatGPT already, and then to decide that you're going to spin up unique instances and destroy them every single time somebody wants to do something. Can you do that without charging me $99.99 a month? Like, I'm not sure how that's going to work. And if it's costly, then that's where you start to want to cut corners, and that's when things go wrong. So I don't, being that it doesn't exist, I can't say for sure, but those are where my concerns are. And what's on paper sounds brilliant. I certainly hope they can deliver something close to what they've promised.
Yeah, so I actually wasn't aware that they were spinning up a new VM each time and then tearing it down. Hopefully the new iPhones, hopefully they don't put the new cost into the extortionate phones as they are.
Well, I was going to say, as expensive as an iPhone is, maybe we've already paid for this feature and we're just waiting for it.
Exactly. Where would you? Where would you?
Well,
Yeah.
there's also some corporate privacy things that I'm a little concerned about that it's unclear to me how they're going to handle as well. And that, currently I'm an Android user. I have a work profile and a personal profile on my phone. And if I open up Teams in my work profile, I can't copy something and paste it into my personal profile. The company, like sandboxed, if you will, like they're two separate worlds. And uh, if I'm an iPhone user and I can shuffle things off to Apple's cloud, like now we've got corporate compliance issues, and it's unclear again, like, will this be able to be centrally controlled to say, this is a company device, you can't use Apple Intelligence? Or is
Mhm.
Apple Intelligence going to be so secure that companies will be okay with it? There's questions there as well.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And it's really kind of going on a bit of a tangent. It seems like we are having to put more and more trust in black boxes effectively with the rise of public clouds. One thing I'm beginning to see murmurs of is organizations actually looking at scaling back on their push to public clouds and going back to keeping more critical operations on-prem. So interested to hear your view about this, yeah, this public cloud, where it's going. Do you think there's going to keep pushing this way, or do you think that some organizations might begin to scale back?
Well, at the enterprise end, I think we'll see some experimentation there. I mean, the one of the risks of public cloud also is lock-in, and so it can be hard to move back. Once you move in, it can be hard to move out,
Yeah.
because they're most effective when used as sort of serverless tools rather than virtual machines. Back to that idea.
Mm.
That's how they're most cost effective to deploy, which means taking those custom developed apps to take advantage of all the APIs from Azure or AWS or Google and bringing them back in-house can actually really be hard, because they're not just programs that you can spin up on a Windows server or a Linux box. They're dependent on proprietary APIs from the cloud providers. So there's a lot of customization that would be required to bring those apps back in-house. I think at the small end, we're not going to see it at all, right? In small and mid-sized businesses, the idea of running their own email infrastructure is too burdensome, let alone thinking about trying to bring apps back in-house. I think they're cost effective and adequate, even from a security perspective for most of them. I think it's only at the enterprise level that we'll have to think about these things. Uh, Obviously, when there's large public cloud data breach incidents and outages, I mean, Azure had an outage a week and a half ago for a few hours in the central US. That's not an uncommon occurrence. And for something that so many organizations rely on, at some point, you run out of goodwill when you have those kind of outages. So I certainly think there will be, it's going to be a hybrid thing in the end, right? I don't think anybody, back to email, I don't think anybody's going to go, I really want to run my own Exchange servers again. I mean, it's a security nightmare. It's hard to do. Whether it's Gmail or Office 365 or whatever, those kind of services are probably going to be permanently in the cloud, to be honest. But when it comes to things where you're handling large quantities of proprietary information, things like Ticketmaster's breach, which also, included a whole bunch of other companies that were using Snowflake, it wasn't exactly Snowflake's fault, but those are wake-up calls that I think a lot of businesses are hearing those stories and go, wait a minute, could this happen to us? And do we need to rethink our approach? And uh, yeah, certainly could be a small trend, but these things are really hard. If I had a crystal ball, I'd be pitching my ideas out in Silicon Valley. I'd be sitting at my startup right now, rolling around in money.
Yeah, 100%. I think I agree with you, honestly. We've become incredibly reliant on it, especially with a lot of these AI capabilities. For a lot of organizations, it's simply not cost effective to bring all of that infrastructure in-house and then actually run the powerful computers which are powering these models effectively.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, security people are risk managers, and so we have to look at the risk of each thing, and then obviously the highest risk things we want to have the most controls over and the most controls on. Like, we need the most technical controls on those things, and we also want to have the most power over deciding how each one of those things is handled.
Yep.
And then as you go down that risk landscape, it's just like, yeah, whatever, cloud, go ahead.
Yeah, 100%. So bringing it back to AI, we've talked a lot about kind of hypothetical things in the future. Are there any AI threats which we're seeing right now, which threat actors are using to target organizations which are actually in the wild?
There are, but there's not much, which is the good news so far. Really, it's about being able to write really good fishes and to do so without the grammar and spelling mistakes that many non-English speaking criminals were prone to previously. I mean, everybody laughs about phishing training at work, but what's the first thing they teach you? It's like, oh, if the email has, commas in the wrong place, or this is misspelled, or this is in all caps, or it doesn't look professional, these are your signs it's a fish, which is absurd. That hasn't really been true for a long time, even when humans were doing it. But what humans lack is the ability to scale, right? If I'm a Russian criminal and I have to hire the English expert to help me write my fishes, and it's a human writing those fishes, how many fishes in a day can they write? How many templates in the correct English with the correct logos for my bank or for whichever given thing? There's somewhat of a limit to that. And another way to think about that is if you look at social media abuse in the 2016 election in the United States. Quite famously, the Internet Research Agency, a Russian group run by Prigozhin, was trying to cause chaos in the U.S. election. He wasn't necessarily for Trump or for Hillary. It was just cause chaos in the election on social media by spreading all kinds of rumors and mistruths, etc. The scale of that was how many people could sit in a room in St. Petersburg and create fake Twitter accounts and then send out English messages to impersonate Americans to try to create this chaos. And it seemed to have some effect, but of course, it was a few hundred people in a room. It was very labor intensive, and its scale was limited. Now we do see abuse of this through things like ChatGPT, because I can write as many fishes in a day as I can automate, right? I can come up with a concept and stick all the concepts in a file and then call their API and just generate them all day, and every one of them will have correct English syntax and grammar. I can say use UK English, use Canada English, use Australia English, and it'll get that right too. So the S's and the Z's and the U's are all in the right places, which is very uncommon. And I think in societies that are not accustomed to criminals targeting them because of the language barrier, they're also going to be more at risk. And I've already started to notice this with things like Portuguese. Almost all Portuguese spam and phishing attacks historically is Brazilian Portuguese, not Portugal Portuguese.
Mm.
And so when people in Portugal get those messages, they spot them instantly and they go, that's Brazilian Portuguese. That's clearly fake. Now, of course, ChatGPT knows the difference, and it makes it easier for them to target people where they may not be as accustomed to scrutinizing their messaging to determine whether it's valid. So there's some risks there. And we've seen this also occurring in text message abuse and WhatsApp message abuse for romance scams and cryptocurrency scams that used to, again, be human operated by often people that were trafficked in Myanmar and other places. Unfortunately, there's a lot of layers of crime here. And now some of that is being automated, and clearly if you're smart, when you get some of these messages and you start trying to trick it, you can trick it into telling you it's a LLM.
Yeah, 100%. One of the trends I've been looking at is the AI voice generation capabilities. So I listened to a talk last week where someone recorded half an hour of them reading a book and then uploaded it to Deep Six. No, it's
Mm-hmm.
no, it's 11 Labs. It's 11 Labs. Sorry.
11 Labs, yeah.
Yeah, 11 Labs. So they uploaded it to 11 Labs and it was nearly indistinguishable. And apparently now these voice clonings are getting so good that they can actually bypass the voice authentication features on banking apps and banks. So yeah, AI voice calls could be another one coming.
It's still too much work though. If
Mm.
criminals are really lazy and they're lowest hanging fruit. If I'm just out there to steal from people, as long as what I'm doing works, I'm not going to try harder.
Yeah, email.
For most of it, right? So when we're talking about serious crimes, then we have to worry about all these things, right? Because now I'll put enough effort in for a multi-million-dollar business email compromise. I'll take the effort to maybe clone a voice or that kind of thing, right? So there are risks there. But
Yeah.
for average crime, I think it's just too much work. I mean, a half an hour of somebody's voice, like I've got to go gather 20 YouTube videos or 3,000 TikToks of them to try to feed the thing. And that tweaking that has to be done to make it as good as that demonstration is I mean, so I've done the same with 11 Labs. I actually, as a podcaster, I had tons of recorded audio of myself. So I was like, here, consume this. And then, have me, read the Constitution of the United States, or just made up some random things to have it read for me. And the amount of tweaking to make it believable was quite a bit, to be fair. Like, I mean, the total process of my experiment took about an hour of my time. So if you consider an hour per victim or an hour per attack, it better be a high yield attack, because in general, it's spray and pray. I want to send 2 million of these things out. And even if I only get 1,000, I mean, 1,000 victims is great. Like, it doesn't have to be high yield. It just has to be high profit. So again, we have to adjust our risk meters to go. If I'm worried about a government coming after me, I have these risks. And if I'm worried about a sophisticated criminal because I have something very valuable they want, I have this second set of risks. But if I'm just an average person, these things are probably not near-term risks.
Yeah, 100%. I think we're coming up on time, but final question. So we have large language models coming into enterprises, and they're being used and integrated in potentially reckless ways where people are just getting these things attached to back-end services. Do you think we'll see a trend in these being a common attack vector for attacks like remote code execution and more serious exploits, or do you think it's going to actually be quite niche?
At the moment, what I'm most worried about is people using it for software development and booby-trapped libraries getting used by these LLMs by being tricked in, like, rather, it sounds a little far-fetched, but when you think about something like GitHub Copilot that's helping you write code, and this has already happened a little bit by accident, and we're just waiting for it to happen on purpose, is kind of what I'm getting at. If your real library out there is called OpenSSL, and the criminal creates one called OpenSSL and uploads it to the repository, if it's in the repository, an LLM doesn't know the difference between the real one and the fake one necessarily. So then if I start seeding some blogs that I know the LLM is reading and using in its training material with the one with 3 S's instead of 2 S's, it might just start telling people to use that one that's backdoored. And a coder who's not being careful might miss back to typos and incorrect things that you're looking for in a fish. We're going to have to start thinking about this if we're letting machines help us write our code. Every library that's being called in Python, in Ruby, in Node.js, whatever it is you're using to make your code, if you're letting something else write part of that code, you're going to need to carefully scrutinize that there's not misplaced periods or dashes or extra letters where they don't belong. That might be hard for a human mind to see, because when we start seeing 2 S's together and 3 S's together, our brain doesn't really differentiate. Yeah. And if they start doing that kind of thing, I think that's where one of the big risks is a lot more. We've already seen a lot of poisoned libraries in most public open source repositories before LLMs. And now this just is a new vector for a way to get more victims to be tricked into taking those Trojanized code snippets instead of hoping on human error, right? Like before, criminals were relying on you typoing 3 S's, and that doesn't happen very often. But now there's literally an active way of tricking Gemini or ChatGPT through manipulating public sources into thinking those are real. And so I think that's a real risk that I would be very careful of in a tech company if my coders are using it. It's no different than if I start seeding Stack Exchange with those same sort of bogus things that people might copy and paste, but it can be done at scale.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, thank you so much. I learned a lot just talking to you, really enjoyed it. And yeah, really appreciate it.
No problem at all. Thank you for having me on. And if anybody wants to reach out, they can find me on LinkedIn or Mastodon. I'm always happy to engage with folks that have questions or disagree with me or anything else.
Wow, what an insightful discussion. I personally took away so much from this. Chester just has a wealth of knowledge and he's able to convey concepts so well. I hope you all learned just as much as I did. And remember, Chester's podcast is Security Takes Two. So if you'd like to see more of him, make sure to check out the show notes. Okay, and that's a wrap. Thank you so much, everybody, for staying to the end. If you have any feedback, please feel free to reach out or tell me in the comments. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one.